Hi, I'm John, and I made more problems. This video is a part 2 to my previous video, which, thank you for over 100 views on that one, but it's a continuation because I've really been enjoying coding. So obviously, within a week of the previous video, I coded 16 more characters and ran another round robin. And we did Elo this time, and I will put the changes to the previous characters on screen right now. Armed has more range. Fireball can now hit the opponent has more damage. The wall. Pike has more damage. Soft Machine is now a growing damage character and has less initial damage and healing is less growing damage. Don't worry about if you couldn't hear that. I'll go more in depth about it on these character sections. I have a really awesome section here called Notable Bugs. I was paying a lot more attention when I was coding this time, so I actually noticed a lot of the bugs, and unfortunately, most of them were fixed, most of the way through the tournament. So we have, every match until Brick versus Sickle is kind of off because basically there's a special effect, message that goes out every time a certain character lands a hit. Both of the players were receiving that message. So player 2 would get a buff when player 1 is getting a buff, but player 2 couldn't buff themselves. Don't know how much this affected the tournament. Also, every staff match up until Staff vs. Fishing Rod didn't have their buff where they could hit the enemy with the fireball and also the wall, so they were only able to hit the wall. So it's just old staff until Staff vs. Fishing Rod. Every Sickle match until Brick vs. Sickle is off because it was broadcasting player 1's buff instead of player 2's buff. That's basically it, yeah. Right before we start, there's been a little revamp to the character cards. Sorry, that was me dropping the crayon on the floor. We have placement, name of the character, win-loss rate, win percent, greatest win, and worst loss are still included. But instead of score, we're going with Elo because that's, the name of the game in this tournament. With that being said, let's get into the rankings. One last thing I low-key forgot about. There's been a slight revamp to the menu, so now we're not doing any of that nonsense where it's click here, click there. No, you can just click anywhere and it's random now. Thanks. Starting out in 32nd with the first of the 2 charge characters, we have Gauntlet, who has a win-loss rate of 2-29, greatest win over Staff, worst loss to Caber, and an ELO of 112.2. Gauntlet is a set damage charge character, which means they deal a certain amount of damage, and they get one big hit where they heal a little bit and it does more damage. This is just supposed to be a direct upgrade to Caber, but it really isn't. It's probably because the range is worse. The code was fixed after their turn, which is, unfortunate for them. I think they're one of the biggest, Also, they won their matches earlier on, so I'm pretty sure that means the ELO worked against them. Yeah, you hate to see it. Next up in 31st, we have Caber, which is inspired by the Ullapool Caber from TF2. They have a win-loss rate of 3-28. Their greatest win is over Shuriken, and their worst loss is to Shrink Ray. They finished with an ELO of 144.3. Yeah, this is the second of the 2 charge characters, unless you include a later character who's technically that. But anyway, like I said, they're just kind of like a direct nerf to Gauntlet, but it didn't really work out that way. They had one unexpected win over Shuriken, and, that pulled them ahead. Also, they had, better range, so that was probably good. And the fact that the bug was fixed during their turn probably helped. Probably not going to bring up the bug after this one, because it's kind of redundant, but, First to reach top 30 is Dummy, with a win-loss rate of 4-27, their greatest win over Sword, and worst loss to Gauntlet. They finished with an ELO of 218.1. If you're wondering why Dummy did so bad, it's because that's literally what they are. They do 1 damage all of the time, except for a 1% chance they'll do 100. They were just made for testing, and they happened to be in the tournament. So, it's kind of expected. Here in 29th, we have Shrink Ray, who finished with a 6-25 win-loss rate, greatest win over Bo, worst loss to Dummy, and had an ELO of 227.9. Shrink Ray is a set damage character who shrinks the opponent when they land a hit. Unfortunately for them, their range is lackluster, and so is their damage, and the shrinking isn't even that fast, so yeah, it's fair that they did this bad. In 28th place, we have the last placer of the original bunch, with Scythe, who had a win-loss rate also of 625, greatest win over Brick, worst loss to Sickle. They had an ELO of 268.5. Yeah, Scythe just fell off. They had 0 changes from last time. It's just that they're bad. Yeah. First of the damage over time characters, none of the damage over time characters actually did very good. You'll see them in about 10 seconds. In the damage over time trio, in 27th is Flamethrower, with a win-loss rate of 8-23, a greatest win over Brick, and worst loss to Scythe. They finished with an ELO of 279.4. Flamethrower is simultaneously a damage over time, area of effect, set damage, and also a charge character. They're basically just a combination of Scythe with less damage over time, and also they got a flask-like area of effect thing, but only when they've charged up a certain amount of damage. The puddle of fire that they create does exist for longer, I guess, and does less damage. Yeah, no, they're just like very underwhelming. For some reason, their fire damage kept on stacking, so good for them, but also I don't know why. Here in 26th, the winner of the most common worst loss award is Sickle, with a win-loss rate of 11-20, greatest win over Boots, and worst loss to Shrink Ray. They had an ELO of 284.4. Sickle is much more faithful to the original Scythe from the Urklax Weapon Ball videos than the Scythe in my game is, in the way that they're a set damage character who has damage over time, and the damage gets more frequent as the more hits they get. They're probably the greatest benefiter of the bug, because, you know, their own bug that I mentioned earlier basically meant they always had free damage. Yeah, when it was fixed, they basically just didn't win anymore, so that's probably explains why they have an 11-20 win-loss rate, and they're this low. Yeah, that's it. In 25th, we have Staff, who came in 15th among the original cast, so about the same. They finished a win and loss rate of 8-23, the greatest win is over Sword, and worst loss to Gauntlet, and had an ELO of 289.6. Even with the buff and or like fix from last time, where the fireball now hits the enemy also, it didn't really help with Staff's overall viability. They just kind of suck. Sorry. Breaking into the top 2/3 of the cast, we have Warp, who finished with a win-loss rate of 13-18, a greatest win over Brick, and worst loss to Shrink Ray, with a big jump in ELO to 313.3. Much like Scythe, Warp had no changes from last time. Probably one of the reasons they did worse is just, like, their ability isn't super helpful to, like, themselves, and glitching out of the map is actually kind of detrimental to them if they were winning. Also, their range is pretty bad. That's really all I can say, because nothing else changed. 23rd is Katana, with a 12-19 win-loss rate, greatest win over Unarmed, and worst loss to Staff. They finished with an ELO of 346.3. Katana is the kind of potential man of this tournament, and also kind of my favorite one, because they basically have the same scaling as Old Sword, but just, like, on a much weaker body. Like, sorry, let's get into this. They're simultaneously a growing damage and a set damage character. They get more katana slashes every time they land a hit, and then it does a set amount of damage per slash. Yeah, the scaling for the amount of slashes is the same as Swords, but the damage is much less because it's not actually growing that much. Still, about decent. Next member of the OG cast, hovering about the same place they were last time, is Dagger, with a win-loss rate of 14-17, greatest win over Flask, worst loss to Sickle, and an ELO of 372.4. Yeah, since Dagger didn't really get any changes from last time, and the Player 2 version was only used 3 times, which were the matches they weren't playing, yeah, nothing really changed. I mean, yeah, they have, like, mediocre range still, but good damage, so that's it. Lance, is next up as our 21st placer with a win-loss rate of 3-18, greatest win over unarmed, worst loss to sickle, and an elo of 381.4. Lance is both a set and growing damage character, because normally they just do like a set amount of weak damage, and then they can charge, which lets them do a growing amount of damage, which is set up while they're doing their set damage hits. Sometimes they get this bug where they get stuck in charge mode, which is very good for their viability, but I'm pretty sure it was based entirely off of the code being broken. So, I don't know, they kind of got a nerf in that way, but, you know. Next up, Hammer. With a 15-16 win-loss rate, a greatest win over Mace, and worst loss to Warp, and an elo of 388.9, they're just about as viable as last time, slightly below average. Hammer has gone unchanged since last tournament, and performed about the same, so there's not really much to say about them. Bo is the first character to crack a positive win-loss rate, with a 16-15 win-loss rate, a greatest win over Soft Machine, and worst loss to Shrink Ray, and had an elo of 393.2. Again, Bo has gone unchanged from last time, but they won the award for most restarted matches, which is shared with most of the other projectile characters, because they were really good at crashing the match. That's really it, though. They did just about as good. They did worse than last time, but they still did pretty good. The 32nd character added, and our 18th placer, the winner of the most balanced and most restarted matches award, is Current, who has a 15-16 win-loss rate, a greatest win over Sword, and worst loss to Flamethrower. They had an elo of 403.3. Current is a set damage trap character who placed down like an electricity tripwire thing every time they land a hit. The more hits they get, the longer the tripwire lasts. That's really it. They were just really balanced overall, so that's good. The next recipient of the Most Restarted Matches award is our 17th placer, Shuriken, who had a 13-18 win-loss rate, a greatest win over Mace, and worst loss to Caber. They finished with an elo of 412.3. Shuriken gained a damage buff from last time, so that really helped them out here. There's no mechanical change, it's just they got more damage. They also restarted the match a lot, which was really annoying, but, good job, Shuriken. Marking the halfway point is Axe, who had a win-loss rate of 17.5 to 14.5, a greatest win over Unarmed and technically a draw to Boots, and a worse loss to Warp. Then, their elo was 416.7. Axe is a set damage weapon that spins slower than usual. This allows it to just stack on a bunch of damage if the axe is ever overlaying with the opponent. They started out extremely strong in the initial bracket I did, but they kind of fell off over time, which sucks for Axe, but they still did pretty good. 15th place with 15 wins to 16 losses is Fishing Rod, whose greatest wins over Scepter and worst losses to Warp. They had an elo of 438. Fishing Rod had no changes from last time, and they started out the simulations very poorly, but just kind of got better. So, good job, Fishing Rod. 14th place is Flask, with the Most Restarted Matches award also. 2011 win-loss rate, greatest win over Spear, just like last time, and worst loss to Warp. They had an elo of 443.6. Again, nothing changed with Flask, they just kind of fell off. In 13th place is Recruit, with a 17-14 win-loss rate, a greatest win over Pike, and worst loss to Katana. Recruit finished with an elo of 456.9. Recruit is a set damage character who heals themselves for 10 damage or gains defense points every couple of hits. They're based off of the Royal Recruit from Clash Royale. It's just kind of a generally unremarkable character. I mean, they almost cracked top 10, but they didn't really have any special stats about them. So, good job, Recruit. 12th place is Brick, who has a 21-10 win rate, a greatest win over Unarmed, and worst loss to Scythe. Brick finished with an elo of 471.2. Brick is a set damage projectile character who does knockback. They are based off of Brick Boy from that one Anthpo video. Brick kind of has a stun effect at times where the brick gets lodged in the opponent and it does way more damage than it's supposed to. and they just were really good. Like, the projectile made it really hard to hit Brick, which was the purpose, but, For 11th place is Rope Dart with an 18 to 13 win-loss rate, greatest win over Leveler, and worst loss to Hammer. Rope Dart had an elo of 482. Rope Dart is a growing damage character based off of Scorpion from Mortal Kombat, who pulls themselves to the opponent, so it's a lot like Fishing Rod. This is really good for building up a lot of growing damage, and they also had pretty good range, so it makes sense why they're up here. Also tied for 10th with a also 482 elo is Luca with a much more impressive win rate of 24 to 7, a greatest win over Spear, and worst loss to Dummy. Luca is a set damage character based off of Leaky Eye Luca from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, who just kind of shoves the opponent around by moving them left or right. Not sure how much this character was affected by the bug, but I'm pretty sure it's like a lot, because there's no way they would win this amount like regularly. But other than that, they had great range and good set damage, and their effect was usually pretty helpful, so yeah. In 9th place is Leveler with a 23-8 win rate, greatest win over Spear, and worst loss to Shuriken. Leveler finished with a elo of 497.3. Leveler is inspired by Gems from the Heaven Metronome series of Weapon Ball fights. They're another character who heavily benefited from the bug because they can just level themselves, or the opponent levels them up for them. The way their levels work is that they just gain more damage over the course of their levels. If they hit the max amount of random damage they get, they level up. They had really good range on the fully leveled up version, and they usually were able to because the opponent literally leveled them up, so even if they were losing, so Leveler is kind of a cheater, but, 9th. Pike is our surprising 8th placer with a 21-10 win rate, greatest win over Sword, and worst loss to Sickle. They had an elo of 498.5. Since last time, Pike got a damage buff and a big glow up, so now they can keep up the pace with most of the characters. Maybe a little bit too well, but, most of this was just by themselves, like, other than their special effect activating randomly. Most of this was themselves, so good job, Pike. Our 7th placer is Soft Machine with a win-loss record of 21-10, the greatest win over Sword and worst loss to Bow. They had an elo of 500.2, making them the first character with 500 elo. Soft Machine, who is now a growing damage character, seemed to be really helped by the changes given, because now when they have the opponent at disadvantage at the bottom of the screen, the opponent's actually at disadvantage now because Soft Machine can do real damage to them over time. So that seemed to really help propel them up the rankings. In 6th place is Scepter with a 22-9 win-loss rate, a greatest win over Boots, and worst loss to Hammer. They finished with an elo of 505.3. Scepter, despite being nerfed twice since last time, is still a very strong character, probably due to the fact that they're a growing damage character. B, they still heal like more than any other character who's able to heal. Granted, the only other character is Gauntlet, and that ability didn't work for like more than half the tournament, but still, they were able to heal off a lot of hits eventually, so that's probably the reason why they're still so high. In 5th place, with a large jump since last time, is Unarmed with a 21-10 win-loss rate, a greatest win over Mace, and worst loss to Katana. Unarmed had a finishing elo of 506.8. Seemingly and understandably, Unarmed's range buff made them like an actual character instead of just a punching bag, because now they can hit the opponent instead of just kind of like rubbing against them and maybe hitting them every once in a while. So they did a lot better. In 4th place is Mace with a 21-10 win-loss rate, greatest win over Scepter, and worst loss to Dummy. Mace finished with an elo of 509.3. Mace is a set damage character who spins faster over time and is inspired or directly taken from the Mace from Heaven Metronome's Weapon Ball series. Their starting speed is like really slow, which is good, kind of, because it works in the same way as Axe. And them spinning faster is technically a nerf, but it makes them, by the time the end of the match comes, they're able to just like always hit the opponent. So that worked out great for them. Good job, Mace. First on the podium with 545.7 elo is Sword. With a 22.9 win-loss rate, a greatest win over Boots and worst loss to Dummy, they also won the award for most common greatest win. Despite Sword's growing damage being like 40% weaker than it was in the first tournament, they did extremely good, probably because they're just extremely consistent and no nonsense. In second place is Boots with a 27.5 to 3.5 win-loss rate. Greatest win over Spear and worst loss to Sickle. They had an elo of 570.7 and the award for the greatest win-loss rate. Boots honestly just came out of nowhere for me. Like, they didn't really get any buffs or nerfs since last time, but they still did really well, probably because they were just a good character. They just did really bad the first time. Good job, Boots. I don't really know what happened, but they did really good. In first place, the first character created is Spear with a 27 to 4 win-loss rate. Greatest win over Sword and worst loss to Flask. They had an elo of 616.6. Spear, despite receiving no buffs or nerfs from last time, did extremely well, probably because I guess they slipped under the radar last time. Like, I didn't nerf Flask, but they did, like, much worse. And I didn't nerf Spear, and they did much better. So it's kind of interesting. They had a few losses, but they still did incredibly good. So they'll definitely be getting a nerf. Good job, Spear.
And that's the end of the video. Thanks for watching. There might be a part 3 to the series. I'm definitely able to do one. It's just that I don't really want to. Mostly because there's a lot of characters and it's taking really long. And it will take really long if I go through with doing a part 3. Especially because I started editing this video in November and I just finished it. But also because I kind of want to move on to do other things. Like, I have a lot of other video ideas, and for some reason I refuse to do more than one video at a time. So even though I barely post, I want to do something else. But anyway, thank you for watching, and goodbye.